is lots of people think, well, that's how things make energy when there's no oxygen. Sort of. Fermentation itself doesn't make anything as far as energy is concerned. But fermentation is going to help us get rid of pyruvic acid. So fermentation occurs in anaerobic conditions. In other words, conditions without oxygen. And various pathways yield different results. In fact, I'm going to show you a chart in the end of several different pathways. And lactic acid fermentation, which is what occurs in muscles. Anyway, we say we're making ATP because we don't. Remember what we said happened if there's no oxygen. We ultimately could shut down the whole process. We shut down electron transport, we shut down Krebs cycle, shuts down glycolysis to get rid of pyruvic acid. That's really its point. Because if we can get rid of pyruvic acid, which of the 3 steps in respiration are still going to happen?
The
CO2 and the ethanol, or the alcohol.
Well, the glycolysis for sure. Not so much Krebs cycle because we're still going to have the problem with the NADH and FADH piling up because we don't have any oxygen. But if we can get rid of pyruvic acid, we can still keep Krebs cycle. We can still keep glycolysis going. Means we get 2 ATP. A lot less than 36, but at least it's 2. We'll stay alive. Yeast, they start with pyruvic acid. In fact, in some cases, they're known as what we call pyruvic acid sink. It's just a way to get rid of it. And their byproducts are CO2 and ethanol. Which of those 2 byproducts are we interested in? CO2. We're interested in the CO2. That's why your bread is soft. You gotta look at your bread, it's full of holes, right? Those are carbon dioxide bubbles. That's why if you've ever made bread, you gotta mix the yeast with the water and the salt and the sugar, blah, blah, blah. You're basically taking a living thing. That yeast that you take out of your fridge is alive. It's dormant, but it's alive. That's why a lot of times in cooking they talk about blooming the yeast. That just means waking it up. Warm it up with a little bit of water, give it some sugar. It's gonna do its thing. But what do you know about the water that you put the yeast in? What can't it be? One of the things, we don't have any bakers. What's the one thing they always tell you about yeast? Be careful and make sure the water is not what?
Warm.
Not too hot.
You can kill it.
If the water is too hot, you kill the yeast. And dead yeast doesn't ferment. But you put it in, you give it time, what happens to that dough over time?
Nice and fluffy.
Rises. The reason it's rising is the yeast is producing all this CO2. Now, if we look at this, does that mean that there's ethanol in bread dough? Sure there is. Has to be. Fermentation's happening. But when you go to Stop and Shop to buy your bread, they don't card you, do they? What happened to the ethanol? It was there. Say again? Sure. You put it in the oven, you bake it, you drive all the ethanol off. So can you get drunk on bread dough? Sure you can. Challenge is you have to eat about 3 loaves of raw bread dough before it would have an effect. And my guess is you'd be so sick by that it wouldn't matter.
Yeah.
That's my kind of party.
Although I did find out 3 years ago, I had one high school student, I tell my kids everything, decided they were going to try that. They were puking for 2 days. Because there's nothing in raw bread dough that the digestive system likes. It's oil, it's unrefined flour, and sugar, and it was ugly. I thought it was hysterical. What happened to the CO2? Does CO2 exist in wine? Sure it does. What happens to it?
Vented off.
Vented off where? You're right, but how? Where do we put wine to let it age?